So now we're going to show a film, and as Cheryl just told me, everybody likes films. So this is going to work. So it seemed appropriate, since we're talking about climate communications, to go to the other end of the spectrum, because we've been talking a lot about language. How about a film with no words? And how would films with no words communicate things about climate change and other things that we have to look out for? So I spent 10 years of my life in the Gulf area, and in New Orleans in particular. I did my undergraduate studies on disaster housing, and my graduate work on what will happen in New Orleans when the big one finally comes, which it did in 2005, and that was Hurricane Katrina. I wasn't there for that, but we did a lot of work to support people there. So anticipating what you know is going to happen. In other words, hurricanes come to places like New Orleans every year. It's just a question of whether it's this big or that big. So how you then document that to cause people to say, we knew that. Why don't we prepare better? I thought it would be great for you to meet Greg Jacobs, who made the film Witness Katrina, which is a collection of the snippets of what was really going on in the Superdome and elsewhere to cause you to say, wow, that's what it really feels like to be there. Now, he's working on new films and a new project, the Here and Now project, which he's going to talk about a little bit. And the moderator will be Cheryl Boone Isaacs. She is the head of ASU's Sidney Poitier New American Film School. And before that, she was the president of the Academy of Motion Arts and Sciences. So without further ado, Cheryl and Greg. By the way, there's a blue iPhone up here. Whose is this? Does anybody want it?
Does anybody
would you like to have it with you or up here? All right.
Rearrange the furniture. Hello.
Da, da, da, da, da, da.
These are incredibly slippery chairs.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Duke, for inviting me to participate in this very valuable few days of learning about issues of the day and issues of the future, because the future is here. I think we all know that. So we're going to start off first showing Greg's teaser trailer for the Here Now project. As we say, roll it.
السلام عليكم.
سلام ورحمة الله.
Brad! Oh no!
This has never happened in my lifetime.
It's coming this way, fast! Let's get out of here.
Bonjour, en ce moment, il y a beaucoup d'incendies sur la planète.
İnsanlar can havliyle eşyalarını evlerinden boşaltıyorlar.
Many cities across Henan province were hit hard by this record high rainfall.
Denizin hali
Beğenmedim. Hiç beğenmedim.
Oh man, it's hard to breathe, it's so warm.
I think the zombie apocalypse is gonna start. They made the fucking hurricane, bro.
Anybody in here? Berto, cepat sudah. Berto, cepat sudah. Воды такая ситуация. Щипит глаза жестко, кругом все задымлено.
Yeah, so you're saying it's coming in 2023, but I think it's already been here.
And then 2024 and 2025 and 2026.
So let's start off, because I'm so curious as we have talked, and your project really stirred me, frightened me, but the realization is what it is, and what do we do about it? So my first question, how did you come up with the idea for making a climate change film using this approach, which is rather unique?
Yes, it is. That last clip, by the way, in case you hadn't guessed, was in Brooklyn. So we got started on the Here Now project. And actually, the idea for it came about 15 years ago. We used this approach for a documentary we did for the History Channel called 102 Minutes That Changed America, which was a real-time reconstruction of the morning of 9/11 in New York City using all found footage and sound. And it was a little bit frightening even to put that film together, not just the production process, but because we didn't know how people would react to have no narration, no talking heads, just be immersed back in the moment through what are essentially primary sources, the videos that people take themselves as they're experiencing things in the moment. And that film ended up striking a chord. It ended up winning an Emmy for documentary. It became the highest rated special in the network's history. And now they show it every year on 9/11 as part of people's commemoration. It's now a ritual to watch 102 Minutes. So my co-director, John Siskel, was talking with a friend of his, longtime family friend, who has been involved in climate for decades. And she's always said, you got to do a climate film, you got to do a climate film. But we didn't know how our way in. And he started talking with her about this approach, and she said, that's it. Because there's a sense now, I think, especially with documentaries, that the climate narrative is now so hyper-politicized and so, in some ways, predictable. We know what the moral narrative is going to be. It's going to be victims and villains. It's going to be, there's going to be some sort of either description of the science that is maybe going to make me lose interest, or there's going to be a narrative that starts by kind of eliminating half the audience right from the very beginning. So how can you structure a film that would not do either of those things and that can play to people who maybe don't want to hear or don't think about climate change and get them involved right away? And that's sort of how this came about.
Well, it's really interesting with the speakers that we had earlier before we took the stage. On bottom line, it's about humanity.
Yeah.
It's about people. It's about what we do as individuals, what we do with each other, how we make it real, but not scary. Because once it's scary, everybody moves away, or they think it's someone else's job. And that's just not the case. We all do have the ability to have some control over ourselves and those near and dear to us. What made you think the approach could work for climate change or offer something that other climate-centered films haven't done?
Mm-hmm. So, and it was a huge, those previous two panels, Allison and the previous panel, were amazing and thankfully confirmatory for me, because I think we nailed 8 of 9 of Allison's points, and the 9th is one that we're getting to, which is the question of where do you leave people at the end? But I think the hardest thing to communicate in a setting like this about climate change is the global simultaneity of it. That's the hardest thing to make entertaining or engaging. That it's not something that is just happening, first of all, there's the narrative gap of the urgency. Is this, can you get people to see that it is happening now, that it is here now, and that it's not something that, it's going to happen to someone else somewhere down the line. But then how do you make it so that the fact of it happening everywhere, all at once, all the time, is interesting? Because if you do it in a kind of dry and scientific way, it can then kind of quickly push people off. But often what we do instead is we use specific individual stories and or specific events to stand for the larger whole of climate change. But what ends up happening, as amazing as films that do that can be, a lot of times you end up really caring about that thing or that person. I really care about coral now, or I really care about water issues now, but I don't necessarily make that leap to the global simultaneity of climate change. Or, oh my gosh, the people in that movie were unbelievably courageous and strong. I could never do that. It takes someone like that to be able to tackle climate change. And so I think the idea of jumping from country to country, there are 15 events from 2021 in the film. And the film goes chronologically basically from the beginning of the year to the end. And the idea of lining all these events up, not giving an ending to them, not providing an aftermath or information about what sort of the news of it would be, what was the death toll, what were the consequences politically, that kind of thing, makes it so that each event kind of segues into the other, and the connection starts to be unavoidable, and then you start to sort of realize that, oh, wait a minute, these aren't discrete events. These are discrete examples of a much larger thing.
Like we were talking about earlier, one of the segments in your film that really got me was the floods in Germany. Mm-hmm. And then the card came up and said, 3 days later, and it's China. And I must say, that just snapped my head a little bit and thought, oh my God. I mean, that really touched me in a very big way of how rapid it can happen, and how to start getting folks used to speed. Maybe we had a little bit of it a few years ago with COVID, because remember, it was New Year's Eve in 2019, and 3 months later, you would never in a million years have believed that in 3 months your life was going to change so much, right? And climate change, to me, is a lot like that.
I mean, we picked 2021 because we started the film in 2022, and so it was just the most recent year. And it was, as we might remember, a pretty lousy year for the human habitability of the planet, after all. So we had a lot to choose from, unfortunately. But it's that sense of one thing leading into the next, and and the sense of borderlessness of it. I mean, that's why this is such an interesting conceptual structure to think about climate change, because it's deliberately about linking borders, linking entities, states across across the country. But this summer there were fires in Canada that I'm from Chicago that canceled the White Sox-Yankees game. Like, suddenly that brings climate change home, because you realize it doesn't matter that there's a border in between Canada and New York City. So to start thinking not just about the borderlessness of it, but also the empathy that it takes to then connect with people who are across those borders. It sucks to have your house flooded if you are in Brooklyn or if you are in Indonesia. And to see in the film people responding, the patterns that emerge in the way people's responses are to these events, there tends to be a pattern of the thing happens and it's something they've never experienced before, and at first it seems like fun. There's a shot in the film during Hurricane Ida, I keep coming back to Ida, where kids are running out in the street and they're playing around because, oh my God, I've never seen rain like this. This is so much fun. And then it goes from, this is really fun, to, wait a minute, this isn't fun anymore, to, this is the worst thing I've ever experienced. And that's the pattern that replays itself everywhere in the world, because we're not ready infrastructurally, we're not ready socially, and we're not ready psychologically for the scale of what's happening. So hopefully the film will serve as a way just to give people that filter, to start thinking when something happens somewhere else in the world, to start seeing, oh, I know that face. I know how people are responding like me there. and I can empathize with it, and I can see the bigger picture that this is a climate change thing. This isn't just something that happened in Kenya.
I also noticed throughout today, one of my favorite words, of course, coming out of film is storytelling. And I think in every way, in every level, what this story is can be and should be told in every way that it can be, whether it's in journalism, whether it's in audio, written verse, poems, and of course film. It's about the story. And I think certainly for most of you who I believe are journalists and educators, that is what is important in whatever avenue that you work in. It's about the story and how the story centers around a cast, and the cast is us, is people, and the impact, and that's what the story is. And I think it might also help folks not be as frightened of it, because we all know relatives and friends who would rather just cut it off, whatever is going to scare them, right? It's like, I don't want to know about this. Yeah. It's somebody else's. But I think if we make it human, not scary, but more about preparing, that here I go again. That would be a great service to all communities, is to personalize without fear. This is the story, and we work together because there's no other real way to move forward.
And I think that's one of the things that I've sort of taken from the comments earlier, that this is a film that is about individuals kind of experiencing these events and telling the stories their own way. And it's diverse in a way that you can't cast, because it is just people responding kind of naturally. And you see in the faces and in the voices sort of a common humanity that becomes undeniable, I hope, after a while. And I think, the challenge is if you start this way, and you're talking about, we're all in this together, it's the next step can either be, let's do something about that, let's acknowledge that and proceed from that baseline, or it can be like, I got to get mine. I don't want them to have what they need. So, hopefully we can encourage people through this to see across boundaries the courage that's going to be needed to tackle this. We the one piece, the one thing from Allison's talk that is we're still working on is at the very end of the film, when you've seen all this destruction and all these reactions from people, how do you turn them to something resembling hope or promise that it's not the end of the world, even though it looks like it? And there was a quote from a climate scientist named Simon Donner from British Columbia that really resonated, and I think may end up being the quote we have at the end, which is, tackling climate change, something to the effect of tackling climate change isn't about pessimism or optimism, it's about courage. And I think that's what all of you in this room are doing. You guys are the ones who are the front lines of giving people the courage to say the things that need to be said and do the things that need to be done in order to, I guess, create a population level change of opinion. And that is an unbelievably high hill to climb, but it sort of feels like if everybody sees other people climbing it, it'll make it seem much more accessible. And that's another part of the film, was just like, if you see other people experiencing this and you know that other people care about climate change, it makes it easier for you to care. And it makes it easier for you to be courageous and be brave and do things that are maybe stepping out a little bit of your comfort zone or a little bit of your community's comfort zone in order to bring the rest of the community along.
Did you do any research or talk to experts to validate these theories? And what did you find?
We did, thankfully. They weren't, although now that I'm confident they're not crackpot theories, that really helps. So when we started, the two things that we did, first of all, we had to figure out what events during 2021, we could use. What actually qualified as climate-accelerated extreme weather. And, so for example, people probably remember the unbelievable tornado outbreak in Kentucky and Tennessee in December of that year. The research on tornadoes is still, the data just isn't there to be able to make the kind of clear, really undoubtable conclusion that we needed in order to include it in the film. So we decided not to include that in the film. So that was step one, just learning kind of what is acceptable to say, yes, we know without question that this is something that is climate accelerated. Then it became, let's talk to the climate communications people and learn about what works and what doesn't work, really. And so there was an interesting thing, I think one of the things that Allison was talking about was the specificity of the language. There's research that shows for certain groups of people, if you say climate change, they will shut their ears immediately. But if you say a changing climate, they'll say, oh my God, of course. So if you, talk to a farmer in Iowa about a changing climate, they see it. That's their livelihood. They know that that's happening. And so happy to talk about that. So this was one of the things that informed how we then went about finding the footage. When you're talking to people, how do you say what the film is really about? And sometimes we use climate change, and sometimes we talk about a changing climate.
Well, like I said to you after I watched your film, my first question was, how did you and your team get all this footage? So much of it was personal, people's own vision with their cameras from, I don't know how many countries.
I think all told, it's something like 15, or there may be a total of 18 in them. And there's probably, thousands of clips that we went through and, thousands and thousands of hours of footage. Once we decided which events to include, we then brought in footage researchers, usually from those countries. So we have, a global team of footage researchers, a researcher in China, a researcher in Brazil, a researcher in Kenya, Germany, Turkey. And they had the kind of local and language familiarity to be able to then start searching social media for the clips. And when we did 102 Minutes of Changed America, a lot of that material was maybe the year YouTube started. So the material was not online. So you had to do the detective work and the legwork, and you had to go house to house and make call after call after call. In this case, it really was this weird, it was the perfect pandemic film to make because it was the kind of thing you could do from your computer at home, scouring the web for the right kind of material that provides an intimate and non-professional look at how people were experiencing these events. And you kind of fall in love with the people a little bit. They become this huge cast of characters that we, now quote from and talk about all the time, even though until about 2 months ago, they had no idea they were in the movie. So we put the whole movie together using all of these clips, and only in the last couple months have we gone back to them and said, hey, this thing that you put online for probably your grandparents that has 6 views, it's now going to be in a movie about climate change. So, one of my favorites, for example, was a young girl in the film who is in Vancouver during the heat dome, and she is signing temperature conversions. To whom I don't know. She's just in her bedroom signing temperature conversions. As it turned out, she's practicing ASL. She herself was not deaf. She was practicing ASL. But it's this amazingly poignant way of communicating the science, communicating a basic piece of factual information that we had to get out, which is 43 degrees is not cold for an American audience. 43 degrees is 121 or whatever it is. So you don't realize that you're learning while she's doing this, but you also kind of go, it's her generation. that is the one that needs the help the most. This is all about her generation. So there's a point, I mean, the first time I watched the clip, I was tearing up because it's so poignant. And so, you know, those are the kind of things. She had 6 views, and, you know, I don't think was planning this to be a climate change video.
So about how many hours of footage did you have? And then what was the structure that you all worked with in order to make it personal? You know, you're taking elements of different stories and then making one large story. So take us through your thought processes on how, because I can't even imagine how much footage there was for you to, you know, actually pull together and put. So take us through that, because that is the essence of a story.
Yeah, it's sort of the world on the World Wide Web, so it's sort of infinite. So it started with the decision to do just a single year as a manageable unit, and then to do it chronologically, because we didn't want to kind of put our thumb on the scale as the directors and make it seem like, oh, we just cherry-picked the worst events. So by making it chronological, it's just kind of like, no, God did this for us. Like, he picked it. She picked it. They picked it. So it just kind of unfolds in a way that is just the way the calendar unfolds. So sort of as much as possible, we try to strip ourselves, give the illusion that we are not part of the decision-making. Then you sort of go through, and you kind of go through all these hundreds and hundreds of clips, and you start to see people who pop out because they, the way they articulate their feelings in a particular moment is just interesting, or particularly powerful. And you start to assemble those into kind of a mosaic, and then pretty soon you have, you know, a 6-minute sequence about the fires in Siberia or whatever. And throughout, you have to kind of be judicious about how much climate information you actually seed through it, because you know that people, the moment you start talking about the acronyms that Allison was talking about and the jargon that Allison was talking about, it will feel like a different movie. It'll suddenly feel like experts and talking heads. So how do you weave in information that constantly tethers each story to climate change? That, you know, yes, this is a climate change thing. So we had to find people who helped us in that way as well, and occasional news clips to do that. So hopefully by the time people get through it, they both have an experience of, you know, the global nature of climate change, but they also kind of have bits and pieces of an understanding of what warmer water means, and that sort of thing.
All right, with that said, we'd like to show you another film clip.
Yeah. This one's from right here. This is a home state one.
So how does it feel, Kyle? How does it feel to be a railroad man? Hey, bang on him.
Bro, take a picture of that just so they know.
Hey, Cap, can I bang on him?
Yeah.
C4! Joe! Oh, we're going through a tunnel? Fuck yeah. Wait a sec. Kika, you're kind of tall.
Kind of scary. No one's gonna make it double.
Oh, it's coming over. Oh, it's black smoke. It must be a house.
Sprinkler off for a second. Get up on the roof. See what's going on up there. Oh man, look at that. Oh man, that's the airport burning down. Come on now, guys. Get this fire under control. I don't work too hard to lose my house. Ain't happening. Ain't happening. Whew. Sucks. Get out now. Okay, I gotta load up some stuff in case I have to go. Good luck, guys.
What in the world is going on up here? Look at this. Look at this. They're going to do fire drops. You see that? Oh my God.
Bonjour, en ce moment, il y a beaucoup d'incendies sur la planète. J'ai vu le site de la NASA, 180 feux simultanés qui ravagent les forêts, les terres agricoles et les zones habitées sur les côtes. Beaucoup d'incendies en Afrique, en Asie, aux États-Unis, en Europe aussi.
It's pretty impressive. Absolutely. Okay, we talked about you gathering materials. See you standing over there, Ray, and pulling all of this great footage. I applaud you on that one because documentaries are a bit challenging to get that story right anyway, and to work with that much material and to be able to craft it into a really terrific story. And if you haven't watched it, because we've made the link available, that you all should. If you
we will leave it open for the next few days. So if anybody didn't get a chance to watch it and is sort of intrigued by this, please check it out.
Please check it out.
And please let me know also if get in touch with me, because I'd love to hear what people think and how people think it could be used, even more importantly.
So what's next for the film, for the project?
So what's next is something that I never thought I would say, which is it's going to be screened. It's going to have its world premiere at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which, thank you. If anybody has a place in Davos, please let us know, because we just looked it up on Expedia, which, trust me, nobody who goes to the World Economic Forum looks up where to stay on Expedia, and it said that one of the rooms was going for $23,000 a night. So so if anybody knows a friend who has a billionaire buddy who can help out with that, we would love to know. But that's where it's going to premiere. And we describe the film as kind of like a wake-up call from the world to the world, and to be able to deliver that wake-up call to right to the top, right at the very beginning, is really exciting. After that, it's a tricky thing because we don't know what will happen. Davos might be just an incredibly surreal side trip that we go on, or it might lead to something more. And I think what we want from the film is to be something, for it to be a conversation starter, for it to be something that people can stumble on, start to watch and go, oh, I get it now, or I internalize it in a way I hadn't before. Or you can show at a community meeting or for a conference or whatever, and it can spark an infinite number of conversations from there. So we want it to be very specifically an impact film that is sort of a blank slate that people can draw on in however they want. So that's the next step, is figuring out how we get both the wherewithal, the funding, and also just the sort of the means to be able to create curricula out of this, create a screening guide, all of that. So it's exciting, and we hope that in Davos we find the person who says, oh, I have that billion in my, change in my back seat, so I'll do that.
At least the change from the billion.
Yes, exactly.
Do we have time for questions, or are there any?
Yeah. Yeah. This interview is over. No, it's an incredibly good and complicated question. It's one that's what we are dealing with right now. So my background was in TV documentaries, where when you make a TV documentary, basically, or you used to be, that every clip that was in there had to be, signed off on legally. The networks weren't going to air anything unless it was. The rise of social video has changed that somewhat, because we know it's impossible sometimes to find it. So, and there's a second piece of it that documentary filmmakers have started to embrace, which is the principle of fair use. So if you are repurposing the clip in a certain way that changes its meaning, changes its intent, changes its context, then you can claim fair use and use it without getting the permission from people. So it is, the way we have approached it is we're trying to get in touch with everybody who has a clip in the film and telling them explicitly, we also want to compensate you for this. So, you know, the $600 it might be for somebody in Texas might be nice, but the $600 for somebody in South Sudan might be tremendously impactful. So that is our hope, is that everybody will say, yes, I give you permission, and please pay me. So far, probably most, like just about everybody that we've talked to has said, great, use the clip, and it would be really nice to be compensated. And so we have permission for most people, and then there are, you know, if you have a clip that sort of went viral or is just kind of out there, there's a bit of a presumption that you made it public, and so you are kind of waiving some of your ownership in a sense already. So we are kind of working with that principle a bit as well. So it's a real combination, and none of it is clear. And our hope is that for the people we can't get in touch with, they somehow become aware of the movie, and they get in touch with us and say, hey, I'm glad you used my clip. Can I get some compensation? That would be really great. So that is where we are with it. But it is a deviously complicated thing, unfortunately, and a great question.
Right, it seems good.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I don't know about you, but that was incredibly powerful stuff. And you may wonder, like, why are you showing us a film, right? Like, how am I going to use a film? But I think what's really important to take away, not only to be able to share that, to exemplify climate change in a really powerful way, but think of it as a tool. We tell stories, but we can show. And I think there's something really powerful about showing something real that someone's actually experienced. It can be way more powerful than a fancy graphic or some other piece. So we're just trying to help you think out of your box a little bit when you think about communicating some of the work that you're doing. So hopefully that's a takeaway that you had. So next we have Peter Gerard. He is the Vice President of External Communications at Climate Central, which is an organization, I don't know if many of you are aware of them, but it's a nonprofit where they work with scientists, researchers to really exemplify their work in very powerful ways. So Peter's going to show, kind of take what Allison talked about, but kind of approach it in a different way in terms of how do I actually do this in a way that's really effective. So with that, hand the mic.
Ray, thank you. And I'm going to make my way over and make sure I've got a clicker that's working for me. And I'm going to try to walk you through a bunch of slides. And I get to follow that, so that's exciting. Let's see if we can start here. I think I can move us right through to here. So this is me. I'm Peter Gerard. As Ray said, I work in communications for Climate Central. If you don't know Climate Central, we are mostly scientists. We are conducting primary research into sea level rise, into coastal flooding, into attribution science. So we're essentially working on the connections between climate change and weather, and we're doing it in relative real time. So those are where our researchers are focused. We also do analysis based on data from trusted sources to help people understand the connections between climate and weather. And we are all doing this in the service of communications and essentially the service of people who are communicators. So we are mostly not a direct communication organization. We are working with networks of trusted messengers to try to get climate science and messages about how people are experiencing climate change in their local communities, in their backyards, literally, at scale. So reaching as many people as possible, as often as possible, because that is effectively our theory of change. We see one of the missing elements in climate action, one of the most frustrating missing elements between scientists who are perfectly aware and have managed to perfectly articulate what danger we face, and a world of boardrooms and lawmaking chambers that are responding slowly, if at all. And the link that we see missing is this undeniable, irresistible wave of public sentiment demanding action. And for that, we need communication. For that, we need education. And I was going to initially work on this presentation and kind of sort through audiences and talk about the different audiences and constituencies that we work with. And I kept coming back to one theme that sort of dominated that whole discussion. And so it's the elephant in the room. And that is reaching audiences that are resistant to climate change messaging. So these are self-identified conservative audiences, and by reputation, these are people who are largely deaf to arguments about climate change, don't want to hear about the science, don't want to hear about the impacts, will tune out when you hear stories. And I can say that in some ways, particularly lately, we've uncovered evidence that suggests that that is breaking down and that we are breaking through. And this is partly bragging about the work we're doing and the work that other communicators in the room are doing, but we are seeing, particularly from our media partners, a wave of coverage of climate change, and that includes coverage on self-identified conservative news outlets. We think there are a couple of reasons for this. Hopefully, we are playing a role in all of it. But first and foremost, our approach as Climate Central, suffice it to say, it's nonpartisan, but more important, we are a non-advocacy group, and that means that our work is not supporting policies, politicians, even specific solutions. We're just delivering the science. We're just delivering communications points to help our networks deliver information about climate science to their audiences. And we believe that this helps break down some of the barriers and some of the reasons for particularly our trusted communicators to be hesitant to use the material we're using. But that's kind of the end of our bragging in some ways. It would be naive of us to think that our tactics are the reason that we're breaking through. The truth is, media organizations are in service of their audiences. If their audiences didn't want to hear about this topic, they would not cover it. And we are seeing, and this is more bragging, we are seeing, and this is amongst mixes of all audiences talking about climate change using our materials, a surge in that, and that indicates to us a clear signal that audiences on all sides of the political divide want to know about climate change. They want to know the science. They want it from trusted audiences. And this is kind of my first stop, and I'm going to echo something Allison had said. Messengers matter. This is Jim Gandy. He is a meteorologist in Columbia, South Carolina, and he is the first user of our Climate Matters program, which encouraged and enabled on-air meteorologists to talk about the connections between climate and weather. He is perfectly proud to tell you that he is a media figure in a deeply red area, and obviously wanted to help tell these stories. You've actually are looking at a Climate Matters graphic over his shoulder, and he's telling audiences in Columbia, South Carolina, what the connection is between the weather they're experiencing and climate change. He's putting it in context of their gardens, of mosquitoes, of poison ivy, and he's retired now, but this is 10 years ago. He was the first and piloted this alone for a period of time. We now have 4,000 people in this network who are getting this localized information, and the fact that it's localized is critically important. So being able to leverage a trusted media outlet, having them be willing to carry these messages, and they were braced for feedback from their audience. They were braced for pressure from sponsors to stop doing this. And the wave of criticism that they expected, it never came. And in fact, they far and away got more unsolicited compliments for this work and praise for the work that Jim did. The other side of it is not just that this is a media channel that people trust and look to for the information they're getting. He's a scientist, and people want climate information, climate science information from scientists, and that's another myth that I want to engage in. There's this sentiment that people resistant to climate change are resistant to science, and that there is this anti-science thread that runs through it, and certainly it's real, but it's nowhere near, at least in our experience, as pronounced as you might have heard or expect. And a meteorologist is probably, for a huge percentage of the audience, the only scientist that the audience encounters on a regular basis, the only one that they would know and recognize. And that makes this an incredibly important position to be delivering these messages from. And what the audience wants to know, and I've run into this even talking to members of the media, is my memory failing? Right? Am I wrong in remembering it used to snow? Am I wrong in remembering that it never used to get this hot? Is it me? No, it's not you. This is an example of a Climate Matters issue, and this is actually fresh off the press. This refers to meteorological winter, which just began within the last few days. These are the trends in New Orleans between now and, or the most recent winter period, and 1970. And if you're wondering if it's you, if you're wondering if you know, the winters that you remember in New Orleans were as warm as this is a confirmation that no, we can actually show you with science, we can show you with a thermometer that your memory is not wrong. This is scientific evidence that what you are experiencing in your backyard is climate change. And one of the things I like about this, that I like showing off, is this is a really simple merge between the science and the data, which often bores people, and a really simple visual that helps people understand. And there are two things going on here. Obviously, you've got that linear trend line, which is showing you the classic up and to the right. It's getting warmer, and the experience you've had is valid and correct. It's also showing you the difference between climate and weather. So your background, that jagged line, it's essentially showing you how erratic weather can be, and that's always been the case. There will always be hot years and cool years, and it can be difficult from a perception point of view to align that with your sense of climate change. And being able to say, no, you've got this erratic weather-based situation, this kind of experience that can be all over the place, and we can essentially identify the signal from the noise. It's comforting, it's simple, it's powerful. A couple of tips and tricks here. One of the things that we've tried to do is make these graphics flexible, immediately usable. This is TV production ready. We don't use square much in social, but it's a useful social graphic that can be squared. We can deliver it to you without a background so that you can use this flexibly, you know, anywhere you need to, whether this means getting something that's on brand, whether it means connecting something with a local audience. In Espanol, whatever it takes to make these images and these messages resonate with an audience that will respond to it more readily because we're customizing it for them, is what we're willing to do. And that's been a really important component of this program. It also answers this question. We get asked this really frequently. You know, what do audiences respond to? Does the data bore them? You know, should it be only pictures? And the answer, at least from our experience, is yes, they want everything. It doesn't mean you drop off a data set. It doesn't mean that the model gets delivered to reporters in our network. But being able to show our work, being able to give you the validity of where it comes from, the unimpeachable sources that we're using for our analysis are a critical component of this. When we give you information about what the observed climate is telling you, it's coming from NASA, it's coming from NOAA, it's coming from IPCC. And this, again, is helping people use this information, trust this information, and tell stories with it. And the reason you tell stories is to motivate this wave of public demand for action. This is what it takes. This is the missing link, at least in our view, between the action we need to see and the severity of the crisis we face right now. And hopefully, the ubiquity of communication helps make a reality like this possible. And of course, the reason that we need this is because it needs to resonate here. So I want to talk a little bit about some components of ways to tell stories to other audiences. We think of government offices as both capable of being messengers and also the group that needs to be spoken to and needs to understand. And there are really three components that we've identified. They don't necessarily need to be present in every communications campaign, but they need to be part of the overall message for it to be actionable. And the first one, of course, is to visualize what the impact is on a constituency. I mean, this is fairly clear, and obviously we've got an easy way of talking about the impacts. I mean, these are the gloom and doom stories, and some of this is kind of the beginning of that phase. But the other is giving the information that lawmakers, that policymakers, that planners can use to cost solutions, to scope what the risks are, and to be able to connect them to actionable plans. And then, of course, the third component of that is making sure that we've got a solution, that we've got an articulated way, something that they can do, whether that's passing a law, changing a policy, building a project. There needs to be some kind of an investment that's clear and is a solution. And unless you get that, it is very difficult for this group to take action. I want to show you an example of something that combines all of that in a visual. This is the future. This is New Orleans in 2050 at high tide. And of course, you're looking at the whole Delta area. The areas in red are lower than the level of the tide. They are at risk of flooding on a near daily basis at high tide. Some can be protected, some already are protected. That's why you see New Orleans not shown at risk. There are levees in place, and this model assumes that they work. And this is the kind of specificity that we have found helps this audience, lawmakers, policymakers, planners, take action. This is for Duke, actually. That's a 100-year storm in 2050. This, again, gives you the specificity you need to assess risk. This is based on Google Earth Engine. If you can use a Google map, you can zoom in and find your house. Or you can find a piece of critical infrastructure that will need protection. And I'm sure most of you noticed, since we're talking about the I-10 transect, it's underwater. So whatever it is that needs protected, we need to be able to, at least with this tool, visualize it and help people who can take action understand what the risks are, what the costs are. And the outcomes, of course, in this case, are a pretty tangible project. Clearly, as we think about adaptation, there will be more of this, but this is an example of a positive outcome. This is an example of a known problem. And as much as we can make all of the risks that we face known and scopable, we can help audiences like this understand what to do about it. You might not think that business and financial audiences work in the same ways governments do, but if you think about the needs in that sort of set of three of identifying a constituency with a risk or an opportunity, allowing them to scope and create a cost-benefit view of what that means, and offering an investment or an opportunity to act, that same dynamic has been a way for us as a communications organization to talk to business leaders, to talk to business media, and risks and opportunities can come in a variety of forms. It can be a business opportunity. It can be the risk of losing business. It can be the risk of legislation. It can be the risk of litigation, of regulation. All of these are things that business leaders understand and can react to, and they work a lot like another constituency. Right now, at COP28, we're having some very specific discussions about what carbon pollution is doing to human health around the planet. We're now quantifying some of the risks, and we're helping people envision exactly what is happening to human health based on carbon emissions. And the medical community and health policymakers have a very, very similar dynamic. Obviously, in this case, the constituency and risks to the constituency are well known. the gaps between what they understand and what needs to happen are something that can be addressed with specific information like what the health detriments are. That means they can create new research. We can identify where there are opportunities in policy to change it, and they can make change based on that. Another incredibly important, influential group, educators. It can be a glacial process to develop and change curricula, but it's a really similar construct with those three basic concepts: the idea of a constituency at risk or with a benefit, and of course you've got more or less the most important constituency imaginable, right? This is effectively the future. Being able to help them, give them specific information, make sure that they've got the ability to develop what they need, a plan to create that, and putting together the ability to educate audiences at scale can make an absolutely amazing difference. And again, these same sort of three-part constructs are really part of this. I'm gonna change just a little bit and talk about, in this case, what you're looking at is a social network, and I want to talk about channels. Climate Central is a user of social media. We've got a relatively conservative approach, and we are using social media partly to reach influencers and what we think of as trusted messengers, rather than communicate directly with a constituency that follows us and believes in what we're doing. We have that. We are a trusted messenger to a significant number of people, and it's great to be able to connect with them. There's a problem, though. Social media has a tendency, in fact, it was created to engineer connections. It exists to find commonality. And that can make it an amazing tool to find new audiences, to recruit, to activate, but it can also balkanize. As you establish the commonality between groups, you also separate them. And for people who are attempting to win hearts and minds for persuasion campaigns, that can mean that you're swimming against the current in social media networks. I mean, salmon thrive by swimming against the current. And the fact that the natural arrangement of social media kind of works against you does not mean that this cannot be a marketplace for hearts and minds and a place to convince people. But in the manner of jiu-jitsu, working with the direction and momentum of a platform can make a communications plan work in your favor more efficiently in social media. And now I want to go to the exact opposite end of the spectrum. And anybody who's a fan of semiotics will recognize this as a sign. This is IRL. And it's incredibly powerful. This is something that people are encountering. This is Columbia, South Carolina. I couldn't get an I-10 transect for this one. But this is a sign of climate change. In the most literal possible way, this is something that people are experiencing. This is essentially telling them that the world around them has changed in the most rudimentary, the most fundamental way. And signs don't obviously always have to be signs on signposts. This can be anything from a protest to bumper sticker campaigns. So long as you're encountering it in real life. And this is another interesting intersection between the opportunities at sort of levels of government and management to participate in this and create these really important and powerful signals. I mean, think about about a national park posting heat warnings at all trailheads. Think about the Department of Transportation warning motorists everywhere they go of what floods and when. These are all signs that the world around them has changed, and these are all ways of providing this sort of reinforcement for climate messaging that hopefully you're encountering in the media and virtually everywhere else you go. I'm wrapping up here, but this is maybe the most important thing I wanted to convey today. Talking about climate change, engaging these networks, it's not a precursor to solving climate change. It's not a secondary component of making sure that action gets started. It is, in fact, a significant part of the solution. Winning that undeniable, irresistible groundswell of support is absolutely an outgrowth of communication. So talking about climate change, making this available, and pushing, this is absolutely the connection between needing a solution and getting a solution. People talking is a legitimate, critical, vital component of what we believe is necessary to see the action that we need. Obviously, going through the wrap-up here, messenger, critical. It makes all of the difference. That does not mean the message is anything less critical. Being able to deliver it to audiences as completely, as thoroughly, as accessibly as possible is absolutely vital. It can be really frustrating to feel like your message is falling on deaf ears. It can make people feel like audiences are dumb or ignoring them. Keep pushing and keep the message quality as high as possible, and do not ever, ever, ever, ever stop. This is the most crowded, cacophonic media landscape imaginable. I think everybody knows this is a politically active year, and it will get louder. Don't stop. If you're communicating climate science, it is absolutely critical to making this all happen. I mentioned we've got 4,000 people in our network who are getting these messages about the connections between climate and weather in their backyards. This covers every US media market. Please sign up. And I got this notation, or just ask me. I will help you sign up for this. Honestly, this is kind of a clunky sign up, but really important, and it's information that is, it is interesting even if you were not using it to reach a broad audience. It is a helpful way for you to understand what the links are in your own backyards. That's it. Thank you all for letting me rant.
So I applaud you and Climate Central for embedding climate data into communications at scale. And a lot of the examples that you showed were around symptoms, right? The future trends, the early warnings. Since you two are elephant in the room out there, I'm hoping to throw another one here, which is that I'm curious how much success or need have you seen in terms of embedding the causes? Whether that's fossil fuels, whether that's some other societal norms that are linked with like environmental justice. How much of that has been something that maybe your audience has asked, that that kind of data start getting embedded in communication? And if you have done that, like comparatively, how much the acceptance rate has been? And if you haven't done that, is this the time to start doing it? So I know multiple sub-questions there, but hopefully more than this.
No, really good question, really hard question, and the starkly honest answer, yes, we actually do talk about solutions. Yes, we do talk about point sources. We do talk about where the opportunities are, which means we're talking about where the, where the sources of the problem are, and we do try as much as possible to highlight specific solutions. We focus on decarbonization, and as I said, the starkly honest answer is, it is harder to get traction for that story. It is harder to get pickup on that storyline than it is when, to talk about the impacts and talk about what, I think somebody had mentioned, the idea of like solutions and concepts being like sexy and interesting. Honestly, your hometown flooded is a headliner. It's a sexy, interesting story. The possibility of decarbonization to boost your economy and contribute to a decarbonized future, it's not as sexy. We do see coverage. We probably will see more of it. We're definitely seeing a groundswell, but right now, honestly, it's an uphill climb.
Yes. Go ahead.
Do you know anyone, anywhere, who is using climate data to evaluate trade-offs between competing uses of resources? You showed pictures of adaptation. We're in the process of building 500 megawatt groupings of solar. Those are directly competitive potential uses for money. One fixing a problem in one place and one trying to fix the whole problem. Is there anybody who knows how to use weather data to evaluate those trade-offs?
The answer is almost certainly yes, and I can't give you the name. So I realize that's a terrible answer to your question. I mean, we are working with risk modelers and with financial organizations that are using our data and weather data to help make these decisions. I can't tell you whether that balance is a specific part of the equation, but I expect you are not the first to recognize that they are occasionally, maybe more than occasionally, in opposition.
Anyone else? Yes.
Not a question, but a comment. Just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you do. In 2020, I know Climate Central came up with a study with the fastest warming cities in the U.S. Tucson, I work for the city of Tucson, was the third fastest warming city. And so we use this study, we use that result to push for like policy. And so a lot of the work that we're now doing around climate resilience comes from that. So thank you.
I'm so pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Yes.
I actually have an answer for this question over here. I know there's a lot of architects and designers who are out there, including people on my team, who are doing climate risk assessments. What's happening with weather data? How does it impact the existing buildings? How does it impact existing spaces, existing properties? And how do we use it to influence the decisions for future design? So this is happening.
Accenture is doing a lot of work also with the design, public sector, private sector on assessing climate risk and opportunities. And that's across the board, both including microeconomics.
All right. Well, thank you, Peter. I think that was really, really helpful. And I hope you found inspiration from all of our speakers today. I think there were a lot of great examples that you can take home with you. But I think also what's really important is to understand that we are a network as well. And there is a power in our ability to work together to message things out. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic back to Allison, who's going to give us a little call to action.
Okay, just real quick. It's true that we're all social networks. We're set up in a certain way to create connection. It also might be true that you're not totally accustomed to communicating about climate change in this way that we've been talking about. And like, don't you feel better knowing Peter's in the world doing this work? Yes. When I talk about who I refer journalists to when it comes to attribution, it's Climate Central. We list them on our website. They're really incredible, and I can see how it would make such a difference in your work to connect with them too, but also to connect with each other. So I know Duke's going to say something next, so maybe I'm going to do like a quick on the spot pivot ray based on this. But I think you're all getting on a shuttle next to go back to the hotel. I would really like to invite you, as you sit on the shuttle, as you walk out of here side by side together, to exchange information with one another, to connect on each other's social networks. A lot of what I learn about how to communicate about climate change and what's going on is like fascinating things Marta posts on her LinkedIn. She's very active on LinkedIn. Some of you, your organizations, or you might individually be very active on Instagram. Please ask the person who's sitting next to you what the platform is that they use most, and then follow them. And they'll follow you back. And before you know it, you're going to get a pretty good sense by just sort of watching everybody else. And you're also going to be able to use that material for yourself, because that's such a good practice in social media, is you share what other people are doing. This is how you can learn how to do it, is by following other people. And then this is how you can model it, by doing it yourself. So give each other a follow. And I'm going to give it back to the maestro.
And safe travels, Allison, on your way to COP. Let's try this. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. This has been a rather remarkable day. We started out early this morning. All right. If I was really good, I could juggle a third one. Sorry about that. For those who weren't here, in this room we talked about water and data, and what Peter just ended up with, communications, I hope you saw that's where we were trying to head this morning. How do we take the 10 Across framework and use it as a vehicle ultimately for communication? So I think we're on the right path, and we definitely look forward to working with you, Peter. Those chief resilience officers in the room, I'm looking at Marta, I'm looking at Abena and others, had a fantastic meeting. Thanks to Ray organizing them. Coordinating our efforts around water and data and chief resilience officers is definitely an intention of ours. And so we'll do that. Obviously, communications, we're going to be on this. As I look around the room, I see a 10 Across film, Greg. It's very linear. It's very filmic, beginning and middle. So we're going to do that, I'm sure. I'm looking at Dean Batts, connections to USC, Annenberg, Allison. We definitely got to follow up on that. There's a few others. If I looked around the room, I could call you out as well. But we hope to connect with you, send us thoughts about what you thought happened today, how we could push our project forward, but most importantly, how could it benefit you and what you're doing? If you could build that, I could leverage it for the following. We really want to make sure that what we're doing is not purely a 10 Across project. It's an enabling platform for you to do what you're doing better and to be seen by more people. So let us know how we can do that. The last thing I'll say, and it was touched on several times, you think you mentioned 2024. 2024 is going to be a mess. It just is. So tonight you're going to hear from somebody who knows all about it. Ron Brownstein is a spectacular journalist, has talked about what's happening now decades ago. He talked about it then, what we're seeing now and how it was to some degree forecast. So don't miss Ron. We will have a reception starting in the City Club, not here, but the City Club. Beautiful view of Los Angeles. I have no idea what it's like outside when you're in this room. Could be snowing for all I know. But anyway, let's hope not. That would be a bad sign. Anyway, that starts at 5:30. Ron and I will have a chat at 6:30. No, as you've probably figured out today, we try to avoid speechifying. We try to have conversations. Ron's a very gregarious and wonderful conversationalist. But he will speak to what's ahead and how we navigate that in order to do the good work we're doing around water and data or climate resiliency or whatever it might be. So thanks again for everybody for your attention all day long. We look forward to seeing you in a few hours and for the next couple of days. So thank you.